Rough stone presses against his spine. The air inside the narrow fissure grows heavy, thick, with the kind of electricity that precedes a violent storm. It is the language of equals sitting across a table, riding on the confidence of that friendship. Moses makes his ultimate demand: show me your glory. Both countenance and face are translations of the same Hebrew word, Panim. When the blessing asks God to make his face shine, it is not describing a literal radioactive glow. It is an ancient idiom. Think of human expression. When a person is furious or brooding, we naturally describe their face as dark or clouded. But when someone is genuinely delighted to see you, their face lights up. A shining face is a face of absolute pleasure, unclouded by wrath. It is the smile of a satisfied sovereign. Furthermore, asking God to lift up his face upon the people is a request for direct, undivided attention. It means the king is not looking down at his footstool or distracted by other empires. He is making eye contact with you. Through the tabernacle and the Aaronic blessing, the terror of Cain is held at bay. The people are assured that God's gaze is warm, attentive, and protective. But this blessing was anchored to a covenant. As the centuries unfold, Israel repeatedly shatters that covenant. The nation falls into systemic idolatry, injustice, and rebellion. The priests continue to faithfully recite the words over the crowds, but the lived experience of the ancient Israelites begins to feel entirely different. The ancient prayer promises a shining face, but the dynamic abruptly shatters. The warmth of the friendship is replaced by a terrifying boundary. God replies in verse 20, "But what happens when the sky goes dark? What happens when the king stops looking at you?" The gold of the tabernacle and the warm promises of the priesthood eventually gave way to a much colder reality. If you read the poetry of ancient Israel, you do not find a people constantly basking in a radiant divine smile. You find men sitting in the ashes, staring at a silent ceiling. Listen to the agonizing cry of David in Psalm 13. "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" Or read the despairing final words of Psalm 88, widely considered the darkest chapter in the Bible. "O Lord, why do you cast off my soul? Why do you hide your face from me?" Look closely at the language. The Hebrew phrase is Hester Panim, the hiding of the face. In biblical poetry, God hiding his face is not a statement about geographic absence. God is omnipresent. He is always everywhere. But presence is not the same as favor. When the psalmist complains that God's face is hidden, he is using the legal and relational language of the ancient royal court. It is the terrifying realization that the king has turned his head. "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." God agrees to pass by. But he forces Moses into the rock. The protection is gone. The enemies are advancing. The disease is spreading, and the sovereign is refusing to make eye contact. It is the active withdrawal of relational warmth. It is the eclipse of God. Up to this point, the question of the Panim has been primarily historical and cultural. But here, at the center of the Old Testament, the stakes become intensely emotional. The hiding of the face represents the darkest night of the human soul. It is the horrifying suspicion that your suffering is happening, completely outside the line of sight of God. What began as an individual poetic lament eventually escalated into a national catastrophe. Because of Israel's persistent idolatry and injustice, God warned them through the prophets that he would actively hide his face from the nation. In 580 BC, the unthinkable happened. The Babylonian army breached the walls of Jerusalem. The temple was looted and reduced to rubble. The golden table that held the bread of the face was lost to history. The priesthood was slaughtered or enslaved. There was no one left to stand before the crowds and pronounce the Aaronic blessing. The people were dragged away in chains to a foreign empire. They were plunged back into the exact terror Cain experienced centuries earlier, wandering the earth outside the attention of the Creator, and covers him with his hand. Moses is only permitted to see the back of God, never the front. The contradiction is jarring. The exile of Eden was repeating on a massive national scale. The Old Testament closes, with a people waiting in the shadows. The sky is like copper. The Panim feels permanently withdrawn. They are living under the silence of an averted gaze. Will the king ever look at them again? The silence does not last forever. But the answer does not come in the form of a rebuilt golden table or a parted sea. The silence holds for 400 years, until a baby cries out in a forgotten village under the heavy boot of Rome. For centuries, the face of God was an abstract terror. It was a lethal glory hidden behind a thick, heavy curtain. It was concealed inside a dark cloud on a mountain, or desperately sought in the lonely poetry of lament. If you tried to look directly at it, you died. Then, the biblical narrative shifts from the cosmic to the intensely physical. In a cold, animal-scented room in Bethlehem, a newborn opens his eyes. Fast forward 30 years, and a man is walking through the dirt roads of first-century Judea. He possesses a biological, human face. That face gets sunburned. It gets covered in the white dust of limestone roads. It furrows in fierce anger when he sees religious leaders exploiting the poor. It streams with tears when he stands outside the tomb of a grieving friend. How can a man have a face-to-face friendship with a God he is strictly forbidden to look at? When the disciple Philip approaches Jesus in John chapter 14, he makes a request that echoes the ancient desire of Moses on the mountain. Lord, show us the Father. Philip is asking to see the ultimate reality. He is asking for the Panim. Jesus' reply shatters the ancient boundary entirely. Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. The Apostle Paul would later write, in his letter to the Colossians, that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. The writer of Hebrews calls him the exact imprint of his nature. But the implication of these verses goes much deeper than standard theology. God did not merely send a new set of stone tablets. He did not merely send an angel to deliver a royal decree. He sent his face. For the first time in human history, the Panim of God has physical cheekbones. The unshielded, overwhelming attention of the Creator is now safely mediated through human eyes. This profoundly changes how we understand the character of God. If you want to know what God's Panim looks like when it is turned toward a despised, marginalized outcast, you do not have to guess. You look at the eyes of Jesus as he speaks to the woman at the well. If you want to know what the king's face looks like when it confronts hypocrisy, you look at Jesus turning over tables in the temple. How can a face be the location of total intimacy in one breath, and the trigger for instant death in the next? The face of God is no longer an abstract mystery hiding in the sky. It is looking directly into the eyes of a leper and saying, I am willing. The eclipse is over. The king has turned his gaze back toward humanity. In Exodus, God warned that no one could see his face and live. But in the four Gospels, the most broken people in society look directly into the face of God and find absolute safety. The lethal boundary of the Old Covenant has been crossed. The divine presence that once required a golden table in a restricted room, surrounded by incense and blood, is now walking through the open streets. Sharing actual bread with ordinary people, sinners are not instantly destroyed by his attention. They are drawn to it. But this ordinary, accessible human face is concealing something staggering beneath the surface. Toward the end of his earthly ministry, Jesus takes 3 friends and walks up a high mountain in Galilee. What happens on that summit proves exactly who he is. For a few terrifying moments, the biological human veil is pulled back. The face of the Galilean carpenter does something that has not happened since Moses hid in the cleft of the rock. The ancient words of the Aaronic blessing suddenly become violently literal. The air at the summit is thin and cold. 3 fishermen are struggling to stay awake. They have followed Jesus up a high mountain. Most readers resolve this tension by assuming the text is just using loose poetic metaphors. We imagine that face-to-face simply means God was nearby, exhausted from the steep ascent. But suddenly, the atmosphere fractures. The quiet darkness of the Galilean night is shattered by an impossible, blinding light. Matthew records the moment in the 17th chapter of his Gospel, and he was transfigured before them. and his face shone like the sun. This is not merely a display of divine power. It is a precise, deliberate answer to the terrifying events of Exodus 33. On this mountain, the biological veil of the carpenter's flesh is momentarily pulled back. The disciples are looking at the raw, unfiltered glory of the Creator. It is the unshielded Panim. Notice what happens next. Two figures suddenly appear in the brilliant light, talking with Jesus. One of them is Moses. Centuries earlier, Moses had pleaded to see the glory of God, but he was shoved into the dark cleft of a rock and covered by a divine hand. He was warned that looking at the face of God meant instant death. But here, on this mountain, Moses is not hiding. He is standing in the open. He is looking directly at the radiant face of Jesus, speaking with him as a man speaks to a friend. The lethal boundary has been resolved. The terrifying glory that once required a thick veil is now safely accessible to humanity, because it has been perfectly contained within the human face of the Son. Decades after this event, another man encountered this unshielded reality. A Pharisee named Saul was walking down a dusty road toward Damascus, or that he was speaking clearly rather than in riddles. Alternatively, we picture a literal, physical human face in the sky. When a light from heaven flashed around him, the brilliance was so intense it physically blinded him. When Saul's sight was restored, his name was changed to Paul, and his entire theology was rebuilt around the image of what he saw in that light. Listen to how Paul later describes the gospel in 2 Corinthians 4-6. He writes, "For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." Paul uses the Greek word prosopon, which is the exact equivalent of the Hebrew panim. Paul is making a staggering claim. He says that if you want to know the glory of God, you do not look into the sky, you do not look at a golden table, and you do not look for a burning bush. You look at the face of Jesus Christ. The glory of God is no longer an abstract, dangerous energy. It has a face, it has a personality, a history, a disposition, and a name. Because of the incarnation, the ancient Aaronic blessing has been fulfilled. The Lord has made his face shine upon humanity, and that shining face is Jesus. This theological architecture is breathtaking. It beautifully connects Eden, the tabernacle, the Psalms, and the Gospels. But theological architecture can still feel cold when you are suffering. A beautiful biblical pattern does not automatically pay your bills, heal your diagnosis, or repair a broken marriage, and assume God is simply protecting Moses from a blinding, radioactive light. The problem is not that the passage is confused. This theological reality is stunning. But how does it change the reality of a modern believer sitting in a dark room, feeling entirely forgotten by heaven? This is where the ancient Hebrew word steps out of history and confronts your own life. You know the theology now. But theology does not always feel true at 2 a.m. when you are waiting for a medical diagnosis, sitting in the wreckage of a failed relationship, or staring at a dark ceiling after a prayer that seems to hit the drywall and bounce back. The ancient poetry of the Psalms suddenly feels deeply personal. The silence feels like rejection. In those moments, you feel the exact terror David described. You feel the Hester Panim. It feels as though God has hidden his face, withdrawn his attention, and left you to manage the crisis entirely on your own. Modern Christianity often trains us to evaluate God's presence based on our emotional temperature. We assume that if we feel a deep sense of peace, a rush of emotion during a song, or if our circumstances align perfectly, God is looking at us. If we feel anxious, depressed, or entirely numb, we assume he has turned his face away. The problem is that we are imposing a modern English definition onto an ancient worldview. When modern people use the word face, but this is a dangerous misunderstanding of the Panim. It reduces the sovereign attention of the Creator to a mood ring. Listen to the specific command God gives to David in Psalm 27, "Seek my face." And notice David's immediate, determined response. Your face. Lord, I will seek. Notice what God does not say. He does not say, seek a sudden change in your circumstances. He does not say, seek an emotional breakthrough. He says, seek my Panim. Seeking God's face is not about chasing a temporary spiritual high. It is a deliberate orientation of the soul. It means consciously positioning your life toward His gaze, even when the sky feels entirely silent. It is a choice of direction, not a guarantee of an immediate feeling. How do you actually do this? You do it by returning to the physical face of Jesus. If Jesus is the exact imprint of God's nature, then God's disposition toward you in the dark is the exact same as Christ's disposition toward the broken people in the Gospels. When you feel the eclipse of God, you do not have to frantically search for circumstantial evidence that He loves you. You look at the text. When you read the Gospels and see Jesus reaching out to touch a leper, you are looking at the Panim of God toward your own hidden shame. He raises His hands to cover His eyes, terrified of what He might accidentally see. He is a man who has parted a sea and collapsed an empire. We are almost always talking about physical anatomy. We think of cheekbones, a nose, a mouth, and eyes. We treat it as a biological identifier. When you see Jesus weeping at a tomb, you are looking at the Panim of God toward your own suffocating grief. When you see Him patiently restoring Peter after a massive moral failure, you are looking at the Panim of God toward your own deepest regret. You are anchoring your reality to His revealed face, rather than your current emotional weather. Because you are hidden in Christ, the King's face is permanently turned toward you in favor. At the crucifixion, Jesus experienced the ultimate hiding of the Father's face, crying out in the darkness, so that you would never have to experience it permanently. The gaze is secure, but this is what it means to walk by faith and not by sight. In this current life, we still live with the tension of an invisible gaze. As Paul writes, we currently see only a reflection in a mirror. We do not yet possess the physical, unfiltered vision of the King. But this tension is not permanent. The biblical narrative has an appointed end. Scripture begins in a garden, with humanity desperately hiding their faces from a holy God. It ends in a completely different city. In the exact opposite way, the biblical story does not end with humanity forever guessing what God is thinking in the dark. It ends with a sudden, overwhelming illumination. But for the ancient Israelites writing this text, a face was not merely a physical feature. It was the absolute center of a person's being. If you turn to the very last page of the Bible, you find John the Apostle describing the new heaven and the new earth. He sees a sprawling, magnificent city descending. But notice what is conspicuously absent. There is no temple building. There is no Aaronic priesthood required to pronounce a blessing. There is no golden table holding the bread of the presence. There is no sun. And there is no moon. None of these things are necessary anymore. Because the architecture of separation is gone. The curse is completely lifted. And then, in Revelation 22:4, John writes the most staggering promise in the entire biblical library. They will see His face. Step back and look at the immense journey of this one reality. The Panim was forfeited in the shadows of Eden when humanity broke the gaze. It was hidden behind the heavy, embroidered curtain of the tabernacle to protect a rebellious people from destruction. It was fiercely sought in the agonizing, lonely poetry of the Psalms. It was miraculously wrapped in human flesh in a Bethlehem manger, so that sinners could finally approach it without being consumed. And now, at the end of all things, the veil is permanently destroyed. Think back to the opening image of this story. It was the ultimate barometer of relationship, attention, and life. This is not ultimately a story about what God looks like. A man named Moses, trapped in the dark cleft of a mountain, the rough stone pressing against his spine, his own hands desperately covering his eyes, terrified that he might accidentally catch a glimpse of the glory passing by. He was told the absolute truth of the Old Covenant. No one can see that face and live. But in this new city, The multitude is not hiding in a rock. They are not covering their eyes. They are not trembling in the dark. They are standing in the open, breathing the air of a resurrected world, fully alive, illuminated entirely by the unshielded light of the Creator. What was lethal in Exodus has become the very source of eternal life in Revelation. The contradiction of the mountain is finally and forever resolved. This is the ultimate destination of your faith. When the Bible talks about the presence of God, this is not ultimately a story about what God looks like. It is a story about where God is looking. The days of the hidden face are numbered. The eclipse you feel right now in your own life is temporary. Every moment you have spent sitting in the dark, it is a story about where God is looking. To understand what was actually happening on that mountain, we have to stop reading the text. Wondering if the king has turned his head away from your suffering is leading to a singular, appointed reality. You were designed to live in the direct line of sight of God. And one day, the sky will roll back. The silence will shatter. You will open your physical, resurrected eyes. You will see the King in all his beauty. You will realize that his unclouded, undivided attention has been fixed upon you this entire time. And for the first time since Eden, you will not have to look away. In English, we have to enter the ancient world, where the concept of a face carried a weight we have entirely forgotten. We must examine one specific Hebrew word, a word that holds the key to understanding divine presence across the entire biblical library. But as soon as we look at the original text, the word creates another problem. Because in the Hebrew language, this word is never singular. It is always grammatically plural. If you open a Hebrew Bible and examine the exact word used for face in Exodus 33, you will find the term Panim, pronounced Panim. The ending of the word is important. In Hebrew grammar, the I am suffix functions, much like the letter S in English. It makes a noun plural. Technically, the text does not say Moses spoke to the face of God. It says he spoke to the faces. But right now, he is trembling in the cleft of a mountain. He has asked for one thing, to see the glory of the God who called him. Why would an ancient language describe a single face as a plurality? Ancient Hebrew frequently used plural forms to describe things that were vast, dynamic, or impossible to measure in simple boundaries. Water is mayim. Heaven is shamayim. A face is panim. Unlike a hand or a foot, a face is never a static object. It is a constantly shifting landscape of emotion, intent, and concentration. It holds a person's anger, joy, sorrow, and love. It is the physical location where the hidden internal life of a person becomes visible to the outside world. Because of this, the word panim carries a dimension that the English translation misses. In English, a face is anatomy. In Hebrew, panim is presence. It is orientation. It is the full weight of someone's attention directed entirely toward you. In fact, English Bibles frequently translate panim as presence without you ever knowing it. When the psalmist cries out, "Cast me not away from your presence," the Hebrew literally reads, "Cast me not away from your panim." In the ancient Near East, this concept carried immense political and relational stakes. Picture the throne room of an ancient empire, and the response he receives contains the most startling contradiction in the entire Old Testament. The man is Moses. The text is the 33rd chapter of Exodus. The king sits elevated above a vast hall of servants, soldiers, and citizens. The room is crowded, but proximity is not the same as presence. Only a select few are permitted to see the king's face. This was a well-known cultural idiom. To see the face meant you were granted a royal audience. It meant you had unhindered access. If the king turned his panim toward you, you possessed his favor, his protection, and his wealth. Your life was secure. But if the king turned his panim away, your access was revoked. If he actively hid his face from you, it was a terrifying signal. it meant his protection was withdrawn, and your destruction was likely imminent. Where the king looked, life flourished. Where he looked away, danger followed. This ancient understanding resolves the contradiction of Moses on the mountain. When the writer says Moses spoke to God face to face, it is not a claim about seeing God's physical cheekbones. It is a statement of royal access. Moses had the king's ear. He had the undivided, intimate attention of the Creator, speaking as openly as a man speaks to a friend. But God's sudden warning, "No one may see my face and live," addresses the terrifying reality. To understand the stakes of this moment, we have to look at what just happened in the valley below. The Israelites have just constructed a golden calf of God's unshielded nature. Moses can enjoy the intimacy of God's attention, but a fragile, finite, and fallen human cannot withstand the unfiltered, raw glory of his absolute being. The creature would be utterly consumed by the Creator. The Panim is the ultimate prize of existence. It is full, life-giving, relational access. But the fear Moses feels while hiding in the dark cleft of the rock is not how the human story was supposed to operate. There was a time when the unshielded presence of God provoked no terror at all. There was a time before the barrier existed. To understand how that access was broken, we have to leave the mountain and return to the very beginning of the biblical text. We have to walk under the trees of a garden. Section 3. The terror of the hidden face. The first time fear enters the human experience, it is a reaction to a sound. The afternoon sun has dipped low. A cool breeze moves through the Garden of Eden, carrying the sound of the Lord God walking among the trees. Before this afternoon, those footsteps were the signal for communion. They were the sound of absolute safety. But now, they trigger a panicked, desperate instinct to hide. They have broken their covenant mere days after making it. In response, God tells Moses that he will still send them to the promised land. Adam and Eve retreat into the shadows. They press themselves against the bark of the trees, attempting to conceal their bodies beneath the foliage. The English translation of Genesis 3-8 tells us they hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God. But if you look at the Hebrew text, the tragedy becomes much more specific. The word translated as presence is panim. They hid themselves from the face of God. This is the exact moment the universe fractured. Before the rebellion, humanity lived in the unbroken line of sight of the Creator. There was no shame, no covering, no cleft in a rock required. To exist in Eden was to exist under the unclouded Panim. It was full, unrestricted relational access. But sin introduced a lethal incompatibility. The creature could no longer withstand the pure gaze of the holy. Notice that humanity breaks the gaze first. They hide. The immediate consequence of their rebellion is exile from the garden. But the geographic eviction is only a physical expression of a much deeper spiritual catastrophe. They are cast out of the Panim. The true punishment is not just the thorns in the ground or the sweat on the brow. It is the loss of the gaze of God. Just one generation later, this tragedy accelerates. Their son, Cain, murders his brother in a field, but he will no longer go with them. His presence will withdraw. This throws Moses into a desperate panic. He refuses to move without God. When God pronounces judgment upon him, Cain is overcome with terror. But his fear is not primarily about losing his farming livelihood. He cries out in Genesis 4:14, "Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden." Verse 16 confirms the grim reality. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord. Once again, the Hebrew word is panim. Cain understands ancient royal protocol. To be hidden from the face of the king means you no longer possess his protection. You are vulnerable, exposed, and entirely on your own. Anyone can kill you, because the sovereign is no longer watching over you. This is the biblical definition of exile. It is not simply being relocated to a different piece of real estate. It is wandering the earth outside the attention of the Creator. We were designed to be sustained by the warm, life-giving attention of God. but sin forces us into the shadows. We are a people living outside the Panim. Once you see this, the entire architecture of the Old Testament changes. The Bible is not a random collection of moral fables or historical records. It is a rescue mission. It is an elaborate, centuries-long effort to bring humanity back into the line of sight of God, without His pure, unshielded glory, destroying them in the process. In verse 11, the writer inserts a parenthetical note to explain the unique nature of their relationship. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face. Humanity is wandering. The connection is severed. The gaze is broken. How can a holy God turn His face back toward a rebellious people? Centuries later, in the middle of a barren wilderness, God provides a dangerous but beautiful mechanism to bring His people back into His line of sight. Inside the dimly lit, gold-paneled room of the tabernacle, the air is thick with the sweet, heavy smoke of burning frankincense. The only light comes from a golden lampstand. Once a week, a priest steps into this sacred space and approaches a small table made of acacia wood. Upon it, he carefully arranges 12 fresh loaves of bread, replacing the cold loaves from the week before. This quiet, sensory ritual seems like a minor housekeeping detail in the middle of a sweeping biblical narrative, but it is actually a profound architectural solution to the tragedy of Eden. The tabernacle was not merely a slaughterhouse for animal sacrifice. It was a carefully engineered environment where the Panim of God could dwell among His people without destroying them. In Exodus 25:30, God gives a specific command regarding this golden table, "And you shall set the bread of the presence on the table before me always." Most English Bibles translate it as the bread of the presence. But if you read the original Hebrew text, the phrase is much more startling. As one speaks to a friend, it is an image of profound, unmatched intimacy. It suggests a comfortable proximity, an open dialogue, a relationship completely devoid of barriers. The words are Lechem HaPanim, literally translated, "It is the bread of the face." Why would God command a perpetual display of bread and call it the bread of the face? In the ancient Near East, sharing a meal was the ultimate expression of relational peace. You did not eat with an enemy. You ate with family. To sit at a table and share bread meant that all hostility was suspended. The table in the tabernacle represented a continuous, face-to-face meal between the Creator and the 12 tribes of Israel. The exile of Eden was being reversed. The king was inviting his people back into his dining hall, but the bread was only a silent symbol. God also provided a spoken mechanism to restore the line of sight. He instructed Aaron and the priesthood to declare a specific reality over the camp of Israel every day. It is found in Numbers chapter 6, and it remains one of the most famous prayers in human history. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. Look closely at the vocabulary of that blessing.